Molt bona tarda a tothom. Sigueu molt benvinguts. Avui tenim una segona gran oportunitat d'escoltar el doctor Andy Hargreaves i aprofundir sobre el tema d'aquest segon webinar. Com construir el professionalisme col·laboratiu. Moltes gràcies, professor Hargreaves, per ser de nou amb nosaltres i ajudar-nos a enfocar un tema cabdal per a la transformació educativa i la millora de l'aprenentatge de tots, els nostres alumnes, també els nostres docents. Per qui no vau poder assistir al webinar del dia 9, vam fer una presentació d'Andy Hargreaves. Ell és professor universitari, és investigador, és escriptor, ha escrit més de 30 llibres i més de 100 articles, assessor internacional sobre motivació, docència, benestar, lideratge, transformació educativa. Defensa el paper crucial dels docents que aprenen junts per a la millora de tot el sistema. El Servei d'Èxit Educatiu i Noves Oportunitats l'ha convidat en aquesta ocasió per parlar sobre com ens cal construir el professionalisme col·laboratiu. He triat 3 frases d'un llibre. Són aquestes. Los grupos con propósito basados en la confianza aprenden más, hacen mejor su trabajo. Los impulsores adecuados cambian la cultura. Los impulsores equivocados cambian la superficie. Y si no tenemos tiempo para tomar conciencia, tampoco seremos capaces de advertir cómo crear el tiempo para ello. Es un círculo vicioso. Llegim aquestes frases al seu llibre Capital Professional, escrit amb Michael Fullan. En la seva recerca sobre professionalisme col·laboratiu i capital professional, Hargreaves defensa que els docents necessitem temps de qualitat per indagar i per pensar junts, thinking together. Parla d'una nova cultura relacional i professional, una nova manera de ser professional basada en la confiança, trust, el respecte i la comprensió. Time, trust, thinking together, temps, confiança, pensar junts. I la quarta T, technology, la tecnologia que ens permet avui aquí aprendre amb altres. La tecnologia que amplifica l'impacte i que dona suport al temps de pensar junts. Són les 4 T's de les organitzacions que aprenen. I aquestes 4 T's també orienten el nostre grup de treball Aprendre a l'escola que aprèn. Ens deia el professor Hargreaves que té moltíssimes ganes de tornar a fer els seus seminaris i conferències en format presencial, perquè li resulta molt difícil parlar amb tantes persones sense poder-les veure, sense poder interactuar. Avui hem fet un esforç per convertir a format online una de les seves dinàmiques. Hem partit de 4 preguntes que us hem fet arribar prèviament en un formulari. També l'hem enviat ara a través del xat, a l'emissió en directe. Gràcies als qui heu respost a aquestes 4 preguntes inicials i després veurem els resultats i el professor Hargreaves els comentarà. I per últim, gràcies també al grup de treball Aprendre a l'escola que aprèn per tota la feina prèvia, ja des del curs passat, que vam llegir l'article de Hargreaves i O'Connor, Solidarity with Solidity, solidaritat amb solidesa, i per tota la feina que farem després d'aquest segon webinar. La coordinadora d'aquest grup de treball, Mireia Xurtó, moderarà la conversa que el professor Hargreaves tindrà amb els professors que l'acompanyen avui a la sala de Zoom. Us deixo amb ella.
Thank you so much for that introduction again, Begonia, and it's wonderful to be back working with you again today. It is below freezing here in Canada, so the weather here is beautiful, it's sunny, and it's very crisp at the same time. So as we will see with collaboration, things can be crisp, and they can be pleasurable too. You don't always have to be warm and on the beach to enjoy the environment around you. When we talked last time about student engagement, and if you remember that session, it's just a short time ago, and when we interacted around that session, one of the things we tried to draw attention to is that if you really want to engage your students, you have to engage the adults. It's hard for adults to engage students if they don't feel engaged themselves. And that includes all the adults, the teachers, the parents, the assistants, the janitors or caretakers, the cleaners in the school, the principals, the leaders. That it's important that all these adults are engaged. And one of the critical ways or crucial ways in which we can get people engaged is by finding ways for them to work together, to interact together, to know each other better, to understand each other, to collaborate. And today we'll be focusing around a relatively new book that is in both English and Spanish, and not in Catalan yet, but you'll probably read at least one of those two other languages, and about what we call collaborative professionalism. And we'll get into what that means in a few minutes, but I thought I'd start for the first few minutes by really letting you know that I've been working in the field of teacher collaboration for over 30 years now. Yes, I really am that old. It's hard to imagine. And you'd think there was nothing else to learn about collaboration, but as we found with this new book, based on research in 5 countries in different parts of the world, there's a lot that we still have to learn, not just about how to collaborate, but how to collaborate better with results that really benefit our students. Let me tell you first, just for a few minutes before we come on to the slides, about 2 other books that I've written and 2 other studies about collaboration. The first was in a long time ago, but it is in Spanish, published by Murata. In fact, the Spanish version of this book, which in Spanish is called Teaching in the Postmodern Age. Some of you who are old enough may know that. In all my citations, which is when other authors refer to my work, it is the 3rd most cited work of mine. So the citations in Spanish are the 3rd most cited work of mine. And as far as we know, this book, with its citations in English and Spanish, is the most cited book on teaching by any living author. It used to be the number 2 most cited book on teaching by any living author, but the person ahead of me just passed away last year. He was over 90 years old. So this book, Changing Teachers, Changing Times, taught us 3 things about collaboration, and that are quite curious. One is it taught us a lot about time. So we looked at how understandings of teachers' uses of time are very related to how close teachers and administrators are with each other. And we compared this, stay with me because this is very strange, we compared this to theories of relativity in physics. So I'm, for the first time ever, in 2 minutes, you are going to understand E = mc squared and the theory of relativity in physics, because this is how it works, okay? Which is, time is related to the speed of light. So how fast or slow time goes depends on the speed of light. And the speed of light is not always the same. We measure the speed of light. Light goes in waves, and we measure the speed of...
Disculpa'm un moment, em diuen que no va la traducció. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Ara sí.
Sí? Perdona, Andy.
There's a technical problem?
Hi havia un problema que no anava la traducció i m'estaven avisant, i com que era tan interessant, dic ara ens perdrem aquí entre el temps i la velocitat de la llum, i em sembla important aturar-te, però em sembla que ja funciona. Disculpi.
My fingers are stuck. Can I continue? Okay, so we measure time by the distance between the crest, the top of each wave of light. But light does not always travel at the same speed. So in the universe, the closer we get to large objects, gravity makes things move more quickly, right? It makes them vibrate, oscillate like this. Are you with me so far? All the panelists, does this make sense? The closer you get to big things, the quicker things seem to go. The further you are away, the slower things seem to go. So if we put clocks on the top of mountains and deep in the valleys, time passes by a very small amount. By the end of the year, those clocks will tell a different time because they're further away from the center of the earth. Are you with me so far? And it is like this. So now you understand the theory of relativity, that time does pass differently depending on where you measure it and where you look at it from. Are you okay so far? All right, good. It's the same with human beings. So think of this. If you're a teacher in the classroom, you have many things to do. You have children to look after. You have interruptions. You have somebody vomiting in the back corner while you're trying to look after the rest of the children. You have some slow learners here, some faster learners over here. You're trying to do all this at the same time. It's energizing, but it's also exhausting. And then the principal or the government wants you to make a change in your classroom. They want you to teach literacy differently, or perhaps to implement more technology. And this is their priority. They're busy as well. They have many changes in their office to look after all at the same time. But when they look at you, the thing that is on their mind is this change that they want you to do. And after a few months, nothing seems to be happening. To them, when they look at your classroom, everything's going really slowly from a distance. But when you're in your own classroom, everything's going too fast. So they try to speed things up. And when they try to speed things up, you're trying to slow them down because there's so many things happening at the same time. I wonder if this sounds familiar to you. And so how do you resolve this? And one answer is you have to bring these two worlds closer together. The principal has to be inside people's classrooms more, not just observing, but also working with teachers. So the principal can keep remembering what it is like to be a teacher with all these other things. And sometimes we need our teachers to be teacher leaders so that they can understand what it is like to do the administration or organize things or work with the adults as well. So one of the ways we moved to the importance of collaboration was by understanding the nature of time and change in schools. And a second, I'll just give you, I'll not mention all three, a second thing we came up with was guilt. How teachers feel guilty all the time. All the time. Now, sometimes they feel guilty because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, or because they are doing what they're not supposed to be doing. And they're worried somebody will find out and punish them. But this is not the main kind of guilt teachers feel. The main kind of guilt teachers feel is like the guilt of a parent, or the guilt of a carer for an old person, or the guilt of a nurse, that their job is to care for people. But there's so many people to care for and so little time to do it. And they feel they can never care enough. And all the time, teachers feel guilty about never caring enough. And how do we measure this? We measure this because every day before Chromebooks or laptops, the end of every day, teachers would have a bag that they'd take home with them. And in the bag would be the students' work to look at, to read, to grade. And you take this bag home with you. And you take the bag home, but then you have the children to put to bed. You have dinner to make. Probably these days you have emails to send to the parents and to read as well. And so all the work sits there for many hours overnight, and you might grade 1 or 2 pieces of it. And then you take it all back to school next day. And you carry these bags of guilt backwards and forwards, because you know truly you're never going to deal with everything that's in the bag, but you still carry it, because the bigger the bag, the bigger your guilt, that you can never care enough. And the more you are on your own, the greater the guilt is. And the only way you deal with this guilt effectively is by setting reasonable limits to what you're able to achieve, and to do that together, as a community. So you're ambitious and you care, but you're also realistic and you don't wear yourself out. So this was a second thing that helped us think about the importance of collaboration and of working together. I hope you're with me so far. And then in 2012, Michael Fullen and I wrote a book. We've worked together for many years on and off, and sometimes we agree and sometimes we really disagree a lot. And that's the great thing about collaboration, because if you can work through your disagreement, you can end up in a place that neither of you were in when you began. So disagreement's a good thing about collaboration if you have the same values. And so we wrote this book on what we called professional capital, which is also in Spanish with Marata. And drawing together a lot of work that we'd done over recent years, our argument was fairly simple. And by the way, this book got the prize for the education book most likely to have most impact in the world that year. $100,000. Although we didn't get too excited because we had to share it. So that's $50,000 each. And then in America, they tax it. So we lost 40,000. We lost 40% of that. So that became about $30,000. And then they paid it in 5 installments, which was $6,000 a month. But it sounds great, you know, like, whoa, $100,000. But really, it did not buy my house or anything else like that. So the idea is very simple. In teaching anything, if you want a return, you have to make an investment. How do we invest in teachers and teaching? We do that as individuals. We invest in their status. We pay them enough, or we need to. We train them properly. We develop their skills. That's human capital. Second is what we call decision-making capital. It's about judgment. How do you improve teachers' judgment over time so teachers get better? This is about professional development, professional learning. It's about the teacher taking a risk to try new jobs, new year levels, new subjects. It's about people challenging themselves as well as other people challenging you. But the most important one, the research shows, is social capital. That is how good investing in people together. And the evidence on social capital is the more that you work together in your school, the better you will be. However, whatever people's human capital is, however good they are on their own, they will become better simply by being surrounded by very collaborative and very professional colleagues. And I'm sure some of you have seen this, you know, in your career. You've moved from one school where you really struggled and you were on your own to another where people work together and suddenly you lift off. And it's because of the people around you. And the opposite is true, because sometimes you take a new job and it seems like a great job, and then you find the school is toxic. People hate each other. People work by themselves, and suddenly you begin to question whether you're a good teacher anymore. And it's not you, it's the people you're with that's the crucial factor. So this is what we learned from professional capital. So let's now go to the screen share after this kind of fairly long, but I hope you'll feel useful introduction.
Professor, si li sembla, vol que li presenti els panelistes abans?
Okay, so I'm just going to ask you, can you see this?
Sí, ho veiem.
You could? Okay, that's great. Thank you. So the issue is three issues about collaboration. Why should we collaborate? How should we collaborate? There isn't just one way to collaborate. And what are some of the different ways to collaborate together that have value for you and for your students? And what we know from all the existing work until we did our study and wrote our book is that working together collaboratively has four benefits, at least four benefits. There's a lot of research now, quantitative research, that shows actually the more, on average, the more that teachers collaborate, the more that student learning improves, student achievement goes up, and student well-being gets better, especially when you have teams that focus on a particular student. You bring everybody together who knows the student, and so the student's well-being improves as well. We know that when teachers work collaboratively, a change is easier because the change belongs to everybody, not just to one or two people. We know that teachers are more likely to stay in the job or stay in their school or stay in the profession if they're in a collaborative culture, because you feel supported, you feel stimulated by the work is just more interesting and more sustainable. So you're more likely to stay with the job, to stay with the profession, and to stay with your school. If you want to keep good teachers in your school or attract good teachers to your school, then having a very collaborative school is a way to do that. And last, when teachers work together who all know the children, you're more likely to develop the whole child. When we feel it's just my responsibility to know everything about the child, it's too much. You need everybody's view, including the teacher who taught them last year, the school secretary, who's probably the first person the child talks to every day when they come into the school. You need everybody who knows the child to work together. You need the whole school to take care of the whole child, not just a single heroic teacher. So these are some of the things we know. And these are the books that my colleague Michael O'Connor and I, well, it's the same book, different language, where we drew on this study. So without getting too technical, we got some research funding from the WISE Foundation to really deepen our understanding of not whether it's good to collaborate, but what are some of the best ways to collaborate that make a difference to our students. And we decided we'd like to go to different parts of the world to do this. These are places we're already traveling, so it didn't involve a lot of new money. And to look at how, at what we would say, examples of collaboration that have been recommended to us as being very, very successful. We began with 8 examples, but when we looked into 3 of them, they weren't very successful. So we dropped them and we stayed with 5 that were. And they looked at, in Norway, a school that really focused on involving the whole school in change and setting a vision for the school. We looked in the north of Ontario in Canada with an Indigenous community to look at teacher-led collaboration. So not collaboration driven by the principal, but collaboration driven by the teachers. You'll see an example of this later on. We went to Hong Kong to look at lesson study. Lesson study is where many people will come in and observe your lesson and talk about your lesson after they've observed it and give you feedback on your lesson. And because that can be quite difficult, you need very precise ways of organizing that, so you don't upset people or only give positive feedback. So we're very interested how it's very popular in Japan, in Hong Kong, many parts of the world. We wanted to see how that worked in Hong Kong. We went to the northwest of the United States to look at a network of schools. We'd actually been working with Michael O'Connor and I for several years to look at what it was like to collaborate in a network, and particularly for teachers to plan curriculum together. So across that network, so engagement in collaborative planning. And then we went to Colombia in Latin America, where in Colombia and across other parts of the world now, there are 25,000 schools focused on peace and democracy as their focus in poor rural communities. And with measures applied by the World Bank, these schools also outperform similar schools in terms of things like mathematics and literacy. So by looking at different countries, we wanted to examine different specific ways of collaborating, not just talking about practice, but planning curriculum together, or observing each other's practice, or setting a vision for the school, or teachers initiating innovation. And we wanted to see, this is so important for you, how people collaborate differently in different cultures. And this is very important when you're looking at collaboration in another culture. It's in another culture. So when you bring it into your culture, it won't look exactly like it does there. For example, when you see people collaborate in Hong Kong, it's very formal. And the principal is totally in charge. So when you look at it, it's like an orchestra, which is the principal will say this, and then she'll cue in one of her teacher leaders to say this, and they'll stand when it's their turn. And then she'll cue in another teacher leader to say this. It's very much the culture of Confucius. There's a lot of respect, a lot of formality, a lot of collaboration, but in a very, very structured way. And then when you go to Colombia, it's not like this at all. In Colombia, teachers meet in a teacher center. They come over, and these are mainly women. They come over the mountains on their motorbikes, and they come and they motorbike into the teacher center, and they gather together. and they watch a demonstration lesson, and then they talk about everything. They wave their arms about, they talk about their families, they talk about the children, they talk about the politics, they talk about the strike, they talk about the learning, the teaching, they complain about things, they get excited about things, and they're still collaborating professionally, but it looks totally different than it does in Hong Kong. So it's very important to understand when you look at any other model, learn things from the model, but never try to adapt it exactly from another place. And, you know, even within the Iberian Peninsula, if that's a neutral way that I can describe it, there are many different, you know, it's very different being in Barcelona for me than being in many other parts of the peninsula. And I don't just mean politically, I mean culturally, emotionally, it's often different too. So this is something else we really, really wanted to learn, and something that's important to remember. So I hope you're with me so far, because I have an exercise for you in a minute. So these are the kinds of examples that we looked at: lesson study, teacher-led communities, curriculum planning, cooperative learning in Norway amongst the adults as well as amongst the children, and transformation in Colombia. So I have a question for you, and this is just something for you to reflect on in private. And if you want, you can put words in the chat box in Catalan or in English if you wish. And when you put words in, just put a small phrase in, just a small phrase. And I'm going to ask the panel to come in on this as well. It's a bit of a crazy activity, but stay with me. Are you ready? Before COVID, so this doesn't count for COVID, because in COVID, we've all been wearing the same things. We've all been wearing, like, you know, track pants and loose sweaters and sitting in our pajamas all day. So this doesn't apply. Before COVID, your closet, your wardrobe, whatever the word is in Catalan, how do you organize your wardrobe? How do you arrange your clothes within your wardrobe? Would people like to think about this for a few seconds, and then start to put the words in the chat box? And people in the panel, I'm going to ask you to raise your hands in relation to questions I ask in a few minutes. But let's just take a minute to put things in the panel, and at the side in the chat box, Mireille, Begonia and the team are going to read aloud what you're seeing, if you can translate these for me.
Estic esperant que m'arribin les respostes. Em sent bé, professor Hargreaves? Sí? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes, but you're speaking in Catalan, so I can't understand.
Yeah, but when I was speaking in Catalan, you did not get any translation?
Oh, no, I should be on the translation. I beg your pardon.
I see.
I can't see a translation button on here. So,
okay, so you have to go, probably you've got a button with three little dots. I can see a little headset.
Okay, let's
No, it's where you might have three little dots.
Three little bars. I've got chat, pin.
Yeah, and if you go on the fourth one, there's interpretation.
Yeah, there isn't a fourth one.
Oh.
I've only got three: chat, pin, and hide non-video participants.
That's weird. So what you should have is like raise your hand, and on top of that, you should have interpretation. Because we were wondering what was going on, because when I've tried to talk to you for a few times so far, and you were not getting my translation, and that's it, because you're not on the channel.
No, okay. So
Maria, from the technical team, she says that if you could just for a second stop presenting so that maybe you will...
Stop sharing, yeah.
Yeah, stop sharing.
Ah, now I can see it. Wonderful.
Okay, so
here we go. Yeah.
you have to click on interpretation and then choose your channel.
I can perfectly. Thank you so much.
Well, it doesn't, no worries.
I do
We are
apologize.
live,
I'm going to
but
go
this is
back onto
live
share
right
screen
now.
now.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's my fault. I apologize.
Don't worry at all.
Okay.
Torno al català. Ara, m'estàs entenent ara que parlo en català?
I can, yes. Yeah.
Perfecte, molt bé.
Thank you.
Vols que començo a llegir respostes del xat? Tornem a l'armari? Com organitzem l'armari? Sí? Vas llegint respostes. Mira, tenim. Organitzem l'armari segons roba d'hivern, roba d'estiu, roba penjada i roba plegada. Després també segons tipus de peces, pantalons, camises, jerseis, roba interior, faldilles, roba d'esport. Els pantalons i les camises es pengen. També hi ha gent que organitza l'armari per colors i conjunts. Hi ha qui té capses, qui té calaixos, qui té prestatges. I hi ha fins i tot que posa la roba que més utilitza cap a la dreta del penjador, però bàsicament és això. Segons roba d'hivern, roba d'estiu, segons el tipus de peça de roba. Això són les respostes resum del xat.
Right. So, Salvador Dali believed that drawers revealed the secrets of people's lives. And now I am learning the secrets of Catalan lives. Indeed, we all are. We're looking not only into your drawers, but into your entire closet. What are we learning? Well, I'm going to ask the panel now if we can, so I'm going to come off the slide share so I can see all the panel. And I'm going to ask you to raise your hands into the following questions, most of which have been covered by people here. So hands up if you organize I can only see 4 of you actually.
Sí, són 4. Professor, sap què ha passat? Que abans, com que vostè no tenia la traducció posada, s'ha perdut un moment que jo he intentat presentar els panelistes. Llavors, si li sembla bé, abans que aixequin cap mena de mà, no aixequeu la mà, aprofito l'ocasió per presentar els panelistes.
Yes.
Sí? Perfecte.
Yes, away we go.
Molt bé, perquè és que avui tenim 4 panelistes que tenen una visió que parteix justament d'una experiència de liderar aprenentatge professional. Doncs mira, en primer lloc tenim la Cristina Bertran. La Cristina Bertran és directora de l'Escola Dolors Monserdà Santa Pau, una escola a Barcelona ciutat, i és una escola que ha convertit la indagació en la seva cultura professional i realitzen una espiral d'indagació en diversos nivells educatius any rere any. Per tant, tenim amb nosaltres la Cristina Bertran. També tenim en Miquel Mercè. En Miquel Mercè és director d'un institut escola, l'Institut Escola Mestre Andreu de Sant Joan de les Abadeses, i aquest és un institut escola que nasqué ara fa uns 10 anys, fruit de la unió d'una escola de primària i un institut. En Miquel és un director compromès amb l'aprenentatge professional del seu equip i alhora també té un rol com a líder d'aprenentatge d'un grup de centres educatius del seu territori. Després també tenim la Inés Rosado, que és mestra especialista de llengua anglesa a l'Escola Joanot Elisanda de Sabadell. La Inés és experta en connectar els seus aprenents amb aprenents d'altres països de la Unió Europea perquè fa molts projectes i twinning i alhora, connectant els seus aprenents, també connecta ella mateixa amb altres docents europeus. Ella també ha ocupat diferents càrrecs en equips directius i ha treballat a l'administració educativa. I finalment tenim la Yolanda González, que actualment és tècnica docent al nostre servei d'èxit educatiu i noves oportunitats, però fins al curs passat dirigia l'Escola Montseny, també a Barcelona ciutat, on va aconseguir incorporar la indagació en la cultura professional i alhora connectar l'escola amb l'expertesa internacional, introduint i adaptant el Walking Curriculum, el currículum que camina canadenc. Els agraïm molt especialment la seva predisposició a acompanyar avui el professor Hargreaves i a participar en directe. I bé, de fet, ara s'estrenaran, no, professor? Han d'aixecar la mà amb una pregunta.
Yeah, so this is, you're going to get more chance to talk later on, but this is the first one. So if you, and this is for all of you, actually, so there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 of you, okay? If you arrange, some people said some of them organize their closets by season. So if you organize your closet by season, could you raise your hand, like winter, summer, and so on? So raise your hand if you virtually or actually, if you raise, you do. So all of you, okay? All right. If you organize it by color, could you raise your hands, please? You know, all the red things in one place, all the black things in another. I mean, I know in Barcelona in winter, everybody wears black. So there's only one color in winter, but okay. So one with color, everyone with season. What about by type? If you organize it, you know, pants, tops, things like that. If you organize it by type, almost everyone. Okay. All right. So keep your hands down. Keep your hands down at the moment. Just going to try and pull this all together. If you just raised your hand 3 times, could you raise your hand? Okay, 4 of you. Right. So here we go. This is, so probably you are like a super organized, a specific person in life as well as in your closet. When I look in your closet, it probably looks like a military campaign. You know, it's like this, unlike this, it's by color, it's by type, it's by season, one over here, one over there. Super, super organized. And if you belong to a theory of leadership, you would probably belong to what's called a theory X kind of leader. So theory, so the rest of you think about, oh yeah, do I organize closets like this and this and this? Theory X leaders love stuff. They love categories. They love ring binders. They love color coding. They love timelines, roles, responsibilities, data, spreadsheets, outcomes, results, consequences, clarity, all of these things. It could be, just think, you know, you may be what's called there is a literature on this. You could be called a theory X leader. And this is very important in leadership, in collaboration, and in life. It's not wrong, it's not bad. So don't feel too bad that, you know, you raised your hand and you're all kind of very organized like this. But then there's a question I didn't ask, and I'm not going to ask people out there to raise their hands. But when I asked the question, how do you organize your closet or your wardrobe? I wonder if any of you thought, organize my closet or my wardrobe. I wonder what that looks like. You know, you could be the kind of person who gets up in the morning and the first thing that's on the hanger is the thing that you pick for the day. Or indeed the first thing on the floor is the thing that you, until it gets too smelly, and then you pick something else. Because frankly, you think there's better things to do than organizing your closet or your wardrobe. You know, perhaps some of you, when you got married, you ideally would love to have been married in a fleece or a tracksuit rather than like a special fancy outfit. Now, I know people certainly in Barcelona are extremely well dressed much of the time and really figure out how everything goes together. But some people do think, I've got better things in my life to think about than this. And these are theory Y leaders. Theory Y leaders are not so much focused on the stuff, they're focused on the people and on the relationships and on the interaction. Theory Y leaders are really more like the kind of people who don't ask everybody to come into their office for a meeting, but walk around the school waiting for meetings to come to them. They don't have an agenda that they raise with people and then want to go through it. They walk around the school waiting for the agendas to surface by connecting with people, by developing trust, by creating stronger relationships, by creating a space where people come forward to them rather than being the ones who always occupy the space and demanding that other people come into it. These are theory Y leaders. Are you a theory X leader or a theory Y leader? This is the question. Because the truth is, our work on collaborative professionalism, which I'll now go back to, indicates that both of these things really matter. You need to have two things: solidarity and solidity. Now, solidarity, of course, has a political meaning. I'm talking to the right people to talk about the concept of solidarity. But solidarity has a social meaning as well. So what we found in our work across all these 5 areas is that teachers and principals would pay attention deliberately to the relationships. So they wouldn't just hope it was their personality, but they'd deliberately build trust by spending a lot of time around food, for example. Interacting around food builds trust. Interacting outdoors rather than indoors builds trust. Organizing a room in a circle or in an ellipse builds trust. In Canada, the University of Manitoba has an Aboriginal Learning Center. It has no straight lines anywhere. We don't meet around a rectangular table with somebody at the end who is in charge and everybody else far away from them. You know, one thing I love about Iceland is usually it's very gender inclusive. 50% of the politicians in Iceland are female. And you see that in many parts of the culture. But a few years ago, I went to consult with the mayor of Reykjavik. And when I went into the room and sat down, long table, I noticed a bizarre thing. At the top end of the table were all the men. And at the far end of the table were all the women. And nobody commented on this. And this is one of the most feminist countries in the world. So I let the meeting go on for about 20, 30 minutes. And all the people who spoke all the time were the people near the mayor. And they were all men. So after half an hour, I said, this is very strange. So you know what? I'm going to go and sit with all the women. Let's see what happens. And all it did was it disrupted things in the room. And then other people started to move and to exchange places. And then we got a totally different conversation. But the space actually reinforced the existing power relationships and assumptions. And so if you want to build trust, you have to do it deliberately, not just accidentally, on the informal side, but with deliberate actions. Which leads us to the second part, which is solidity. You can't just sit round and share practice. And part of the spirals of inquiry that you're very committed to is it has quite deliberate structures and processes for ensuring that the work of the group actually gets done. And part of that is protocols. So in Norway a few years ago, another very inclusive country, I went into a school with my colleague, Dennis Shirley. And we were, it's a beautiful school. We were greeted by children singing outdoors when we arrived in the school. And then we sat down with the staff and we talked to the teachers and the principal, and we asked them what they were doing. And they said, well, one thing is we were collaborating, but we didn't think it was deep enough. So we thought, well, we'll do something. We'll have teachers go into each other's classrooms and give feedback on each other's teaching. And I said, how did that go? So it was terrible. It was terrible. People said things that were insulting and upset the teachers whose classroom they were observing. And then they overreacted, so they didn't give any critical feedback at all. It was awful. And I said, what are you doing now? They said, we've no idea. We've no idea what to do next. And what they needed was a protocol, a kind of script, not too detailed, that would guide the interaction. So for instance, when you give feedback, always say something positive and always say something about what to focus on next with everybody, not just with the bad teachers, but with all the teachers, and make that expected. Respect the teacher's situation that they are in. Be sensitive to it, be aware of it. And perhaps have more than one person in the classroom. Have 2, 3, or 4. So when you do get a critical comment, it doesn't look like somebody's just being weird, but actually there's some kind of consensus about what the critical responses are. So we need, when we're saying difficult things, we need protocols, we need solidity to guide us. And I'll give you an example of this later on, so it doesn't sound quite so abstract. But both these things, the X things and the Y things, the informal things and the formal things, really matter with effective collaboration. And we tend to divide between the people who like to organize closets like this and people who don't like to organize their closets at all. And both these kinds of people matter. So if you don't have both as an individual, make sure you value both of these things as a team and you take care of them together, okay? And this is me and Michael Fulham. And because Michael Fulham's very big on change, and so am I, actually. When we met in a restaurant, we went to a restaurant called The Change. And that's so here's Michael Fulham and I in a restaurant called in the middle of winter called The Change. And many years ago, we wrote this strange thing, which is, it's hard to eat something you've had a relationship with. Think about that. So if you like to eat rabbit, which I do actually, I'm sorry, but I do, I love rabbit. And you go out and you find some wild rabbit and You shoot it, you kill it, you skin it, you put it in the pot, you cook it, you eat it. It's delicious. It's not too hard to do. If you have a beautiful, fluffy pet rabbit that sleeps at the bottom of the bed, it's hard to decide one day that you're going to stick it in a pot, and like Fatal Attraction, that you're going to stick it in a pot and eat it. It's hard to eat something you've had a relationship with. It's hard for a parent to criticize you or attack you if first you form a relationship with that parent before you wait for something bad to happen. It's hard for a teacher to attack you, even if you first formed a relationship with that teacher. So theory X and theory Y, they both really matter. Now, I'm going to show you a diagram, and Mireille and the team are going to give us some survey results from you in this diagram. Then we're going to ask the panel to comment on this diagram in any way they think is, and on these findings in ways that they think are relevant to you. So here we are. When we're engaged in collaborative professionalism, our challenge is to move from the left-hand side way of collaborating to the right-hand side way of collaborating. So I'll just describe what these mean, and then we'll show you the results. So when you collaborate, do you mainly talk about stuff but not do much? Or do you mainly do stuff without really talk about it? Or do you talk about things and do things together? Talk and do, talk and do, talk and do. You tend to focus on fairly narrow things, particularly in the Anglo-Saxon countries. Sometimes people just look at results in literacy or mathematics. Or do you talk about the broader aspects of teaching and learning? Does collaboration look like just a bunch of meetings that nobody wants to go to? Or does it look like part of your life? Whenever you have a problem, an issue, you get together, you talk about it, you figure out what the result is. Is collaboration driven by the principal, by the administrators, or do teachers feel they can initiate collaboration and change? Is collaboration too easy, too comfortable, like life on the beach? Or is it too contrived, too forced, too artificial, like clothes that don't really fit? Or do you engage in conversations that are genuine, respectful, but also a bit challenging sometimes? You'll challenge each other's beliefs. You'll challenge each other's assumptions. You'll work with teachers who are different from you, as well as ones who are the same. Do you engage not just in conversation, but in dialogue? And do you collaborate? Do you get together and you care about your students, so you collaborate for your students? Or do you also involve your students in the collaboration so they feel part of the collaboration with you? This is the challenge of moving from the left to the right. So we've done a bit of a survey on this. Mireille and the team are going to show the results, and then the panel will talk a bit about what they think, what they're seeing in the results, and how this reflects their own experience. So are we ready?
Sí, compartiré pantalla jo i no puc començar. Em sembla que has de...
I can, yes,
ara.
thank you.
Perfecte. Doncs vaig a compartir pantalla. Molt bé. Segur que ara els participants han reconegut algunes de les preguntes que els hem fet en aquest qüestionari. A la teva escola, les reunions professionals són esporàdiques i episòdiques o bé estan integrades en la cultura professional dels docents? En aquest cas, els resultats, com veieu, els tenim més aviat integrades en la cultura professional dels docents. és cap on anirien la majoria de les respostes. A la teva escola, les reunions professionals són imposades administrativament o bé liderades pels docents? I aquí, si veiem, ja no està tan clar. Tenim algunes respostes imposades administrativament i algunes respostes liderades pels docents. A la teva escola, les reunions professionals són artificialment còmodes o bé genuïnes i respectuoses amb totes les opinions? Sembla ser que genuïnes i respectuoses amb totes les opinions serien les opcions més triades. I la darrera pregunta, a la teva escola treballeu pels estudiants o amb els estudiants? I en aquest cas també és una miqueta meitat-meitat, 50-50, com diem en anglès, pels estudiants i amb els estudiants. Si fem un repàs, doncs, integrades en la cultura professional dels centres, meitat-meitat, entre imposades administrativament o bé liderades pels docents, guanya el fet que siguin genuïnes i respectuoses en totes les opinions i també meitat-meitat entre pels estudiants o amb els estudiants. Em sembla que deixo de compartir ja.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that. These are quite interesting patterns, not all in the same direction. And I wonder if some of our panel would like to comment on what they're seeing and how it resonates with your own experience. Let's spend a few minutes on this.
Vinga, endavant, obriu micro. El primer de vosaltres que vulgui parlar, sense vergonya. Què us semblen aquests resultats? Cristina, vinga, endavant.
No són gaire sorprenents. És a dir, penso que les escoles, o almenys parlo per l'experiència, cada vegada més les reunions no són merament informatives com eren abans, és a dir, hi havia algú que compartia la informació i l'altra gent la rebia, fins al moment que ens vam, almenys nosaltres a l'escola, de plantejar com podíem millorar la participació, és a dir, que no sempre sentíssim les mateixes veus dels docents. I jo sempre dic que gràcies a la xarxa, com han fet canviar totalment les dinàmiques en el claustre, en els equips de treball, amb què hem partit de que tots som aprenents, com hem integrat a les famílies, com hem integrat la veu de l'alumne, realment hem fet que aquesta col·laboració sigui molt rica, molt profitosa i una manera molt important que l'escola, un rumb que ha pres l'escola molt important i que està clar que no volem deixar ja. No sé si...
Inclús, Cristina, amb les reunions amb famílies, oi?
I tant. En el moment que vam canviar, és a dir, que fer que les famílies col·laboressin i hi hagués aquest plus d'aprendre alguna cosa tots junts, també és una cosa que ja ho tenim molt integrat en la cultura d'escola.
Jo he vist un canvi...
Thank you, Christina. That's really helpful, very insightful. You know, our book doesn't deal with, it deals only with professional collaboration. It doesn't deal with collaboration with the community, with other adults and other people in the community. And that's such an important part of how effectively a school works together. So thank you for those additional thoughts. Would someone else like to comment, please?
Endavant, Yolanda, que anaves a parlar.
Bé, jo el que he vist és que hi ha hagut un canvi molt important d'uns anys cap aquí. Jo vaig començar a treballar com a mestra fa uns 12 anys i quan vaig començar sí que es podia dir que la majoria de reunions eren absolutament transmissives, però mica en mica la cultura de la col·laboració i de la construcció de coneixement comuna ha calat molt i, afortunadament, cada cop és més fàcil entrar en una escola i trobar que els mestres demanen que les reunions siguin per discutir assumptes pedagògics o per construir organització entre ells. Encara queda molta feina per fer, però jo trobo que l'evolució està sent molt positiva.
Amb la línia de la Iolanda, volia comentar també que, per exemple, ens hem trobat que el fet d'organitzar claustres pedagògics de bones pràctiques, on tothom comparteix una mica el que fa l'aula, doncs també ens ha ajudat molt a sumar esforços, a conèixer-nos millor i tot plegat a nivell pedagògic doncs, ha transformat molt les reunions, ens ha ajudat a compartir i llavors també la implicació de l'alumnat, no? Escoltar més l'alumnat, que ells també puguin decidir i participar en certs elements del centre, doncs tot això ha obert una mica la mirada del centre, no? El fet de ser també més inclusius i, per tant, el fet de comptar amb tothom, no? Les diferents aportacions totes són igualment vàlides i es tenen en compte i creiem que això doncs, ens ha ajudat un pas en el lideratge distribuït. Seria això.
Jo també m'hi afegiria a aquests comentaris que has fet, Miquel, perquè, a més, dins del claustre es veu les necessitats de que cada vegada els claustres han de ser més pedagògics. La societat canvia a marxes forçades i hi ha fets, hi ha vida d'escola que necessita un replantejament. I fins i tot dins del que és la comunitat educativa hi ha de vegades decisions i càrrecs que dius, potser els càrrecs, la figura del coordinador de cicle, de vegades, si no treballem tant per cicles i treballem més com a comunitat d'escola, la presa de decisions és més viva, no? És una decisió que s'ha pres conjuntament i no només un equip. Nosaltres ara estem en aquest procés de plantejar les reunions d'una manera molt més vives i més al dia, en aquest sentit, no? De presa de decisions i qüestions pedagògiques.
Okay, well, thank you for those. I think you've raised three important issues here. One is collaboration doesn't just happen, and it doesn't stay at the same point. So understanding how effective collaboration evolves and how we guide that evolution deliberately is really important. I'm going to talk about a couple of aspects of this in a few minutes. One of the way it evolves is by who it involves. So you've talked about involving parents and communities and also involving students as well. Our evidence is that usually you need a certain level of confidence and trust among your teachers before you reach out too much to your parents or to your students. Otherwise, the teachers feel threatened. So if teachers still feel alone or defensive, and then you bring in the parents or you bring in the students, then, well, you know, they're going, who are these people to say these things about me? And so you need a lot of confidence amongst your teachers before you start to bring in parents or students in a big way. So there is a kind of sequence in how you develop collaboration within a community. And third, you know, you talked about meetings. We're going to get onto this in a minute. Effective collaboration doesn't mean you have more meetings or no meetings. It means you have better meetings. So it's really not about how many meetings you have or you don't have, but it's about what your meetings start to feel like that is really important. And so coming up in about another 10 minutes is think about some bad meetings you've had, what a bad meeting feels like. By the way, I've run some very bad meetings in the past, so I can contribute to this. I've run some good ones too, but I can contribute to this in terms of my own experience. So I really try to apply everything we learn to everything we do, and also think about some good meetings. You know, what a good meeting looks like, and how you can help to make that happen. So this is coming up for the panel, but it's also coming up for all of you too. So are we okay so far? Does anybody need 2 minutes break now, or can we go straight on? What do you think? Mireille?
Voleu fer una pausa o continuem? Vostè vol fer una pausa, professor?
I'm okay, but it's really
Doncs continuem, jo crec
up
que
to
sí.
you.
Continuem.
Okay,
Endavant.
go. I know, by the way, one difference between Catalonia and Spain is people work much harder in Catalonia. And so, you know, stay on the task. You are the industry, the industrial revolution of the Iberian Peninsula, and you really like to work hard, get things done, and keep your presenters working hard and getting things done as well. So I am from the north of England, and I know exactly what that's like, so I can stay with you on this. All right, let's go back to the screen share if we can. And here we are. Screen share, where are you? Where are you? I may be, screen share. Let's go.
Hauria d'estar amb una icona. A mi em surt una icona verda.
Yeah, here we are. So good. So I'd just like to give you, from our book, a couple of examples of how all this can look different in different places and what we can learn from different cultures and different settings. There are 5 examples in the book. I don't want to go through all of them, so I'm not going to take you to Hong Kong. I'm not going to take you to Norway, and I'm not going to take you to the Pacific Northwest. But if ever you want to look with me at how to build a network, how to develop a network across schools, as well as work within schools, I'm happy to work with you on that in the future based on what we've learned from some of these other settings. The 2 examples I want to draw on that may be helpful for you is really about teacher involvement and student involvement. So in the northwest of Ontario in Canada, we worked with a school district. We've been working with them for many years, where 50% of the students are Indigenous students, First Nation students. The most marginalized group in Canada are our Indigenous students, because of historic oppression and abuse. So if you follow the news in Canada, we have many things to be proud of in Canada, but our treatment of our Indigenous communities is not one of them. And until 1996, we had residential schools in Canada that forcibly separated Indigenous students from their families, from their language, from their culture, from their communities, and treated them appallingly in those schools, often with physical neglect, with physical abuse, and with sexual abuse as well. And the consequences of this generationally for Indigenous populations have created a massive disruption. Children raised with no experience of what effective parenting or families look like, because children were separated from their own communities. The people in these communities were heartbroken to have their children taken away and often turned to alcohol or drugs because the pain was unbearable. And this too has passed on through the generations. So the worst records of achievement in Canadian schools are with our Indigenous communities. And yet Indigenous communities have so much historically to be proud of. The connection to the land, the connection to nature, the connection to spirituality. So for Indigenous communities, spiritual hunger is one of the greatest hungers of all. And with this district in Northern Ontario, the leader of this district was Sean Monteith. Sean Monteith was a specialist in special education. And he began in a really tough way by wanting to get his teachers to believe that Indigenous students could learn. Many of his teachers did not believe that Indigenous students could learn. They said not only can they not read, they can barely speak. Mainly they grunt. They don't communicate. And so he wanted to raise expectations, and he did that in a very demanding kind of way with his teachers. He got them into professional learning communities. He got them to look at examples of students' work together, because even in the worst situation, there are some teachers who are having success, and they shared their successes with other teachers. And when other teachers saw the work that some of their colleagues could get from their students when they'd been able to get nothing, they cried. They cried because they realized it was possible for these students to learn. And they could see it in the examples of their colleagues. So there was a lot of pain at the beginning in the collaboration, not joy, not happiness, a lot of pain in getting the focus on really raising expectations for student achievement. And they made some progress, and achievement started to go up, and then they got stuck. And they got stuck because they weren't yet really connecting with the culture. They were raising expectations, but not really connecting with the culture of what the students had rather than what the students lacked or the students missed. And in the midst of all this, two things happened. One is hockey is very big in Canada. I know it's not in Catalonia, but Canada, it's very big. It's actually ice hockey. If you call it ice hockey in Canada, you know you're not Canadian, because hockey is just hockey, right? And there were some hockey coaches in the district who noticed that some of the Indigenous students who weren't being very successful in class were very successful on the ice. And indeed, not only were they successful on the ice, but they were leaders of the other students in the changing rooms off the rink, as well as on it. So these hockey coaches who've been good at getting success from the students on the ice went to Sean Monteith and said, we would like to lead some professional learning communities by collaborating with other teachers who are not coaches to figure out what are the skills that the students have on the ice that can be transferred to the curriculum off the ice. And in this way, they started even in mathematics to look at the hockey stick and the force and the propulsion and to calculate that and to begin to move some of the skills from one area into another area. And then they began to look at, these are the 7 grandfather teachings, to look at some of the values in Indigenous communities: honesty, humility, respect, courage, wisdom. They started to base more of the learning outside the building of the school, where Indigenous students feel very uncomfortable, onto the land, onto the water, into fishing, into hunting, into wilderness. They'd found in higher education that they'd managed to get some students to graduate and to go on to university. But when they went to university, they dropped out because they couldn't cope with new knowledge and leaving home at the same time. So they moved the first year of university onto some of the Indigenous students' reserves. They brought the university to the students instead of expecting the students to go to the university. And in the middle of all this, Sean, for the first time in his life, revealed something to the community and to us that he'd never revealed before. His own mother is Indigenous. His own mother is First Nations. For decades, he'd been ashamed to tell people that he too was Indigenous. And now he started to become proud of the fact that he was Indigenous, that this was part of his heritage. And Sean became a leader of other Indigenous leaders and networked with them, not just in his community, but throughout the entire province. So two things are going on here: the importance of the culture and seeing what the culture has, not just what the culture is missing. And Sean allowing that space for leaders to come forward and said, let us, the teachers, lead these professional communities, not just the principals and the administrative leaders in the school. And the results have really been quite spectacular as a result in terms of graduation, student achievement, and so on. This is one story that I want to tell you. How in your schools do you let, encourage, allow teachers to drive these communities sometime? And how do you connect with what your students have and your families, and not just what your students and families are missing? It's one of the first things that I want to raise. The second is I want to take you to Colombia and to Vicky Colbert. In 1976, Colombia was torn apart by drugs and violence. It has been for decades. And Vicky Colbert, who was the daughter of a teacher, went to Stanford to do 2 master's degrees. She learned all about John Dewey, Maria Montessori, Paulo Freire, people who will all probably be very familiar to many of us. Vicky says she'll take ideas from anywhere if they will help her students and her communities. And when she went back, she decided she wanted to help build peace and democracy in Colombia through education, by making it the heart of what they did, not on the periphery or the edge of what they did. Here's a graphic representation of what she tried to do. So she started some schools that focused on this collaboratively with the students. The teachers were often very poorly qualified, but the spirit of collaboration is strong. And by networking the schools together, she believed, and they believed, somebody somewhere would know how to teach something well. And sometimes it was the students who knew how to teach something well, and they would move the ideas around from school to school, like how to teach Pythagoras, for example. The teacher may not know, but one of the students may know, and then they would teach it to the teachers. And so they moved the ideas around. And now in these schools, remember, these are in many poor communities. Before, people thought, what can we do? These schools are just in the jungle. They're in the forest. What do we have to work with? Well, they grow vegetables and they sell them to the community. and this teaches them maths and economics. They observe the birds that come through, and they trace and track their migration patterns. They work with what they have, not just what they miss. And students are part of the change, not just the objects of the change. And they still have very formal structures. They meet in teacher centers, they observe demonstration lessons, they move those lessons around between their different cultures and schools and communities. Okay. So I just want to give you two very different examples of how we think what this the richness of the collaboration looks like in practice. So next, I have a question for you. And the question is very simple. How do you run a good meeting? What does a bad meeting look like? And what does a good meeting look like? So because we're in a group where we love to talk about the bad things before we talk about the good things, first, just for 2 or 3 minutes in the chat box, while I go and grab myself a bit of cheese to eat because it's lunchtime here and I'm getting very, very hungry. In the chat box, could you put down what are some of the things that characterize a bad meeting? And then I'm going to ask the panel to contribute to this, because this is where we're going to bring a lot of it home in something very specific. Good meetings, bad meetings. What do they look like? How do we build them? So for 2 or 3 minutes, while I go off and get a piece of cheese, can you put in the box, in your experience, what does a bad meeting look like? What are some of the things that you see? And then we're going to ask the panel to comment on what they see, but also on their own experience. So where you go, I'll be leaving you for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll come back. So what are we seeing here?
Doncs ja tenim moltes respostes. Preparat? Sí?
I'm ready, yeah.
Sí? Molt bé. En tenim més aportacions sobre què caracteritza una mala reunió, més que no pas què caracteritza una bona reunió. Una bona reunió ens diuen que tothom sap els temes dels que es parlarà, que es debatrà. Són reunions participatives, amb un bon espai, hi ha escolta activa, hi ha protocols, són reunions en les quals tothom pot parlar i se centren en els objectius marcats. Aquestes serien les característiques, resum, de les bones reunions. Pel que fa a la mala reunió, ens diuen monòlegs expositius, sense objectius clars ni acords posteriors, no respecten les opinions de la resta, només parla una persona, no hi ha possibilitat de participar, no es pot fer cap aportació i si la fas al damunt reps, una mala contestació, una reprimenda. Les opinions es van repetint, no? Només parla una persona, no hi ha uns objectius clars. Vaig llegint, disculpa, però és que ho vaig llegint així. Intento fer un resum mentre vaig llegint. Queixes, culpabilitat, judicis. Quan s'arriba a criticar alumnes i famílies, quan són unidireccionals, quan veus que hi ha gent desconnectada llegint el diari, corregint, aprofitant per corregir, quan no hi ha confiança, quan hi ha posicions inflexibles. Després ens diuen que poden ser dolentes de moltes maneres diferents. Aquest seria el resum.
Well, it seems to me you know a lot more about what a bad meeting looks like than what a good meeting looks like. So I don't think that's because you have more bad meetings than good meetings. I think it's because often in settings like this, and you should think about this when you run your own professional learning, we're often encouraged to talk about the good things and the positive things. And we're not allowed to get the bad things off our chest. And, you know, we need a formal, we need a setting and a space often to get the bad things off our chest first and just talk about them for a few minutes. And then we can get on to the good things. You know, the bad things are great. Monologues, lack of respect, people monopolize, you know, there's always the same three people who are talking all the time, need more participation, don't want to feel judged, punished, marginalized, right? So all of these things. Now, the question is what is the opposite of a bad meeting? What does a good meeting look like? And this is where I'm going to ask the panel to come in. And when I ask the panel to come in, I think we've already got some, you know, general characteristics like the space and the use of protocols and making sure people can participate and so on. But I'd like you to get very specific here, if you could, as a panel, and each of you, you know, think if you're coaching your colleagues here on, you know, how to run a good meeting, just think not too many things and not too general, one or two very specific things that can really improve the quality of a meeting, perhaps that people haven't already thought of, that but that you know are very important. So perhaps a panel could come in now and really give us some like very specific practical ideas. They're all about collaborative professionalism, but very concrete in terms of a good meeting.
Endavant.
For me, per mi seria...
Yeah.
Digues, Iolanda, et sentim.
Sí. Una cosa que a mi em molesta molt de reunions professionals és no tenir un ordre del dia. Una sèrie de punts que saps que són els que s'han de tractar i també ajuda molt saber a quina hora acaben les reunions. És molt important saber a quina hora acaben i respectar-ho.
Jo volia afegir, totalment d'acord amb el tema temps, que les reunions eternes doncs, resulten antiproductives, però també el tancament de la reunió, és a dir, el fet d'arribar a uns acords, ja sigui en forma d'acte o de recull, que es vegi doncs, el fruit de tot aquest procés d'aportacions i de debat, i llavors una mica al final de tot, el recull. Seria això, per la meva part.
Jo també aportaria que a vegades en gran grup, quan és molt nombrós, és difícil escoltar tothom perquè es fa molt llarg, però sí que es valora molt el fet que hi hagi petits grups de treball, el més heterogenis possibles, que aquests siguin els que hi hagi un debat, per tant, que tothom hi pugui participar, i després una posada en comú que es recullen tots els acords o senzillament s'explica que ha treballat el petit grup, que va molt bé i concreta molt llavors els objectius clars de la reunió, i la gent surt molt satisfeta. Crec que el grau de satisfacció és un termòmetre molt important per tal d'aconseguir una reunió reeixida, que la gent surti satisfeta i contenta d'haver participat.
Jo hi estic d'acord amb tot el que heu dit, però una de les coses que a mi de vegades m'ha molestat en una reunió és que la gent no presti atenció a qui parli. Sí, és igual, és indiferent la persona que sigui. I recordo que de manera anecdòtica, per solucionar aquest tema, doncs en les actes que es llegien a les reunions, nosaltres sempre hi ficàvem alguna falca que no era gens correcta. Com de dir, i Elton John ha dit que està d'acord amb aquesta consigna, no? I recordo que era la manera que tothom escoltés l'acte, que era la part més avorrida de tota la reunió. I això continua passant i és un fet que és curiós i que d'aquesta manera soluciona aquesta part més avorrida de les reunions. Però sí que és veritat que molesta que quan certes persones estan intervenint, doncs que hi hagi algú que estigui mirant el mòbil o el diari o que estigui fent una altra tasca, no?
Jo, si pot ser, també m'agradaria afegir, tenint en compte que les reunions que siguin polifòniques, on tothom hi tingui cabuda, promoure una mica la participació de tothom. Sovint hi ha participants que pel que sigui no diuen res, no intervenen perquè pensen que la seva opinió no és important o per vergonya, I una mica promoure la conversa i fer que tothom... I tu què en penses? I tu què hi dius? Que tothom se senti partícip de la reunió. Penso que també és una bona manera de tenir una visió més enriquidora de tots els membres i que tothom s'impliqui.
So many great... sorry, Yolanda, did you want to come in? I apologize.
Només comentar que, sembla molt obsessionada amb els horaris i sembla molt X tot el que estic dient, però crec que és important per cuidar la gent mirar molt a quina hora poses una reunió. Pensar en la conciliació de les persones. La reunió pot ser molt important per tu en aquell moment, però no serà una bona reunió si és en una hora que no li va bé a ningú més que tu.
Okay, so this is very lively. actually, with lots of really specific ideas drawing on experience. And, you know, people don't already know how to run good meetings. And so paying attention, and let's not assume that people do. So let's actually talk about this. Let's help people. Let's coach people. If people are starting to lead for the first time, don't wait for them to run a bad meeting and then criticize them, but actually give people a bit of coaching, a bit of preparation, a bit of training. It's a big part of what collaborative professionalism is. It's not the only part, but it is a big part. So many things like clear agenda. You don't have to do everything as one group. You can break out into subgroups and tasks, and that brings in more participation. If you have problems with listening to the minutes and so on, as a group, decide what your group norms are, including when people are on and off. So have some things you do that involves getting up and walking around where you can't take your devices with you. That's the best way to stop people using their devices is to do, you know, Sergio Marchionne when he took over Fiat actually made everybody put their devices down or had stand-up only meetings. And if you're all standing up, you get things done much faster than when you're, because people want to sit down again. So it's a good way. It's a good way of managing the time. Let me give you 4 small anecdotes and then a chart that will kind of draw this together before we go on to the final part of the afternoon for you. So 3 small anecdotes, just to show you how varied and specific this is. I'm involved in a project here. When I came to Ottawa, I started a new project. And I invited a female colleague of mine to not only run this project with me, but I said, you're a permanent member of the faculty. I'm only a part-time coming here because I'm technically retired. So first is, if we do this together, we put in the bid, you're the PI, you're the number 1, and I'm the number 2. So she agreed. She was a bit hesitant about it. I picked up after 2 or 3 weeks. I said, so first is, don't be afraid to raise things if you sense something's not quite right. And I said, you're a bit hesitant. Why is that? And she said, well, frankly, before you came, I've done 2 other projects, both with older men, and they both turned out badly. I said, why? And she said, well, I worked really hard and they took over and they ran off with all the credit. It happens. So I said, right. So first is, I don't do that, but there's no reason why you should believe me. You don't know me yet. So here's some people you can talk to who will tell you. If you look at my work, you know, collaboration with women as well as men and so on. But so let's be aware of that. So when we got going early on in the project, we went to another province and we had a launch meeting about the project with the minister. And before I went in, I said, right, when we go in here, everybody's going to respond to me as being in charge of this project because I'm the man, because I'm older, because I've been around longer, so that they know my work and they don't know yours yet. So we should be aware of that and we should disrupt it. So she said, okay. So we went in and we sat down, but when she sat down at the side and the space was left for me at the front. She didn't take the space at the front. So then we debriefed afterwards. I said, right, when we have our next meeting, you walk in first, I walk in second, and you look at where the seat of power is in the room, and you take the seat of power, and I'll take whatever is left over. Because otherwise, everything, the default position is, I'm the man, I'm older, I'm in charge. And so now it's taken a while, but now everybody understands she's the number 1 on the project. I'm the number 2. We do everything collaboratively, But when in doubt, she's the number one and I'm the number two. But you have to work so hard to do that because all the assumptions about gender work in the other direction. Okay, that's the first thing. Second, some of you will know, so we don't share this or tweet about it, but I became president of an international organization about 5 years ago for 2 years. When I went, I'd realized before, so I spent 2 years being incoming president. And I realized before I took the chair as president, there were a lot of negative things that went on in the organization, a lot of gossip, a lot of accusation, a lot of arguing within the meetings themselves. So when I started my first meeting, I welcomed everybody and et cetera, and I said, now there's only one thing that is totally non-negotiable with me as president of this organization. And I said, before becoming president, I've had lots of messages and meetings of gossip that make accusations about other people's character and other people's motivations. Now I am president, I am not going to receive any more of those messages. And neither is anybody else on this board, because I've had 2 this week. And so when we're in meetings, we can disagree. I encourage it. We disagree about our ideas and about our knowledge. We do not, and we criticize those, but we never criticize people's character or we don't know people's motivations, so we don't criticize them. Am I clear? And they said, yes, that's okay. So we had other problems that needed solving, but there's a clear norm set down. We all agreed what it was. And so we proceeded so don't be afraid. If you're the number one, don't be afraid to be they elected you to be the number one. So don't be afraid to be the number one sometimes. Don't overdo it, but don't be afraid to be the number one that people elected you to be. Third, I have a center at the University of Ottawa. It's quite new, and we're about to get $2.8 million for a project. I can't tell you what it is or where it's coming from. You'll know within about a month. So with this center, when we had our last meeting on this, I did 3 things. One is I gave them an article on the developmental stages of a group. And they are, first you form and you're very excited in the early stages. Then you storm. When you've got something, everybody wants some of it. And then all people's different characters and positions come out and you're like this. And I said, that's what's going to happen next. I can't stop it. Neither can you. We just need to know this is what's going to happen next. And it's normal. And when we work through that, then we will norm, we will agree what we do together, and then we'll perform, we'll get good results. I gave them another article on all the risks that accompany new organizations, including first you don't have money, then you do. When you do have money, everybody wants some of it, including the people who aren't in your organization. So you have to manage those politics, okay? Third, I said we had strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. You'll have done this, right? Mapping out what's going to happen next. And as we went through them, about 2/3 of the way through the meeting, I said, so what are my weaknesses? Well, I started all this, but it's not mine now. What are my weaknesses? They looked at me, I thought, what do they mean? What is he saying? What are his weaknesses? I said, no, we need to know these. We need to know what are my weaknesses as well as my strengths. So then it became easier for other people to talk about their weaknesses as well as their strengths within the org. And I have them and they know them. And I'm not going to share them with you completely now. But one of the big ones was, I'm in charge of this thing that now has $2.8 million. And I am not a permanent member of faculty. So as soon as there's a problem with the university, I am the least able person to manage that within the university. How are we going to deal with that as an organization? So these are just three things that are a bit counterintuitive about meetings. All right, let's get a little chart that will show. I need to go back onto screen share. So some of the things to know about meetings, and then we'll come into the final part. And they are these. There's a lot here. So I'll just pick on a few because they're all in English, but we can get them translated later on. A clear purpose. What's the meeting about? Watch the time. Be inclusive. Organize your papers and your slides ahead of time. And if you can't do it, by the way, I can't because I'm attention deficit. So I get somebody to organize them for me. Because if I organize them myself, they're in chaos within minutes. So if you can't do it, don't hide the fact you can't do it. Get somebody to help you. Be deliberate about the space. Don't always have it in straight lines. Think about circles. Think about smaller groups. Think about standing up. Think about things on the wall, okay? Vary what you do. Have different kinds of activities. Don't make your agenda too ambitious. Every meeting should have a moment where you learn something together, because people will love that. Learn something together. Come out of the meeting knowing something that you didn't know when you went to. Organize your meeting like a good meeting is like a good class. There should be moments when you're learning something together, and use the pedagogies to do that. As you said, as the panel said, and when you're finished, tell everybody what you've done, what we've learned. And people love to be taught. You're teachers. So, you know, teach people what you, don't play power games. Don't leave things off the agenda you don't want to talk about. Don't put things last on the agenda you don't like, so there's no time to talk about them. This is how powermongers work. Don't be tempted. Thank people at the end for what they did. Don't forget to thank people and celebrate what you've done well. So, and in general, make meetings things that people want to come to because they're enjoyable, not things they want to avoid. These are not all the things, but these are, and by the way, arrive first. If you're in charge of the meeting, arrive first, not last, but arrive. Don't walk in, you know, like the president who's walked in after everybody else, waiting for the applause, but arrive first and welcome people, just like a good teacher does at the door of the class. So this is just one way of making collaborative professionalism very specific. All right, I've got one last thing for you now, and we're going to close with some comments from the panel, not from me. So at the end of the book, we talk about 10 tenets or 10 principles of collaborative professionalism. Here are all of them. I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm going to talk about 3 of them. And I'm going to leave the panel with some final comments on what these mean for them. Okay, so 3 of them. Just here we are at, not completely at random, but 3 of them more unusual. Number 4, collective responsibility. In your school, do teachers talk about my students, or do you talk about our students? When there's an issue with a student, does the teacher who have them in the year before feel responsible for that student? Or does the teacher say at the end of the year with a difficult student, oh, thank God I don't have to deal with them anymore. Good luck, they're yours now. Or do you still feel you're responsible for those kids when they've left you, as well as when they're with you? And do you work on those students together? And do you have a meeting structure that enables you to do that around students with challenges or students with problems, right? So So, and there are kinds of meetings that you can do that. That can be called student meetings or case meetings, or in Ontario, there's a wonderful word, students of wonder, about we wonder why they're struggling, but they're also wonderful students at the same time. I've no idea how that translates, but good luck with that one, translator, okay? So do you really have collective responsibility? And if you're in a network, do you talk about my school, or do you also talk about our schools? So how do schools start taking responsibility for each other in a community, as well as teachers taking collective responsibility? That's number one. Number two is big picture thinking for all. How in your school does the principal, the director, feel responsible for the big picture, and everybody else just gets a binder of stuff, a big binder of stuff to do? Or does everybody feel part of the big picture? Do you create the vision of the school together, including the students? And what is the process for doing that? Not just one meeting, but over many meetings. Do you live the big picture together? So if you're in an elementary school, do you sometimes, just sometimes, have the teacher of the 11-year-olds working collaboratively with the teacher of the 6-year-olds? You sometimes have a class where everybody has 2 6-year-olds, 2 7-year-olds, 2 8-year-olds, 2 9-year-olds, 2 10-year-olds. So you get a sense of what each other's worlds are like and what each other's children's are like. How do you live the big picture, as well as talk about in your practice, as well as talk about the big picture in your head? Okay, so think about that as number 10. And last but not least is number 6 and 7. How do you have difficult conversations in your school? How do you disagree about things? How do you welcome disagreement about things? How do you give people feedback on things that might be a problem, as well as things that are working well? How do you discuss difficult things like race and privilege and inequality amongst yourselves, as well as with your children? How do you guide conversations about these things? How do you welcome them as well as manage them? So these are just like 3 final things I wanted to finish with. And I've now given a horrible example of everything I'm criticizing. I realize I'm 3 minutes over time, but I do want to give, if you can hang on, just give an opportunity for the panel to make some closing remarks about everything, particularly this, but everything else that we've done today. So over to the panel to close. This is the last thing I will say, apart from thank you. And but I'll stay with you as we go into this final stage. Okay, I'll leave the slides up so that we can see them.
Endavant, que ens voleu compartir.
Ai, Mireia, m'ha agradat moltíssim aquest concepte de nostra o meva, i avui he tingut una anècdota que em va molt bé. L'explico ràpidament. He trucat amb una família delegada, un representant d'un grup, perquè s'ha hagut de confinar per Covid. Jo havia enviat un correu a totes les famílies dient que s'havia de confinar el grup, però he pensat que a través del delegat, de la família delegada, la informació aniria més ràpid. I l'he trucat per dir-li, mira que m'hauries d'ajudar. I m'ha dit, no, Cristina, a tu no, a l'escola estic ajudant. I m'ha agradat el fet de dir, clar, no és a mi personalment, sinó que és a l'escola, i en la pandèmia s'està veient molt qui pensa amb la nostra escola o qui pensa amb individus. És una anècdota que m'ha passat ara fa un parell d'hores i volia compartir. Gràcies.
Perfecte. Algú més? Vol obrir micro?
Jo, una mica la idea també seria això, no? La complexitat que hi ha en la gestió dels grups humans i com dèiem, amb les reunions i tot el que seria la idea d'implicar tothom, no? De buscar aquestes complicitats en un centre educatiu, en famílies, en l'alumnat. És una tasca de gestió complexa que necessita de molts recursos i sempre evitant una mica això, la tarima, no? És a dir, la igualtat per tothom, evitant això, taules amb caps de taula i jerarquies, i aquesta estructura més horitzontal, que de vegades tenim molt interioritzada, aquesta altra més estamental, no? I per arribar a aquesta línia, penso que tenim molt terreny a recórrer i que amb l'ajuda de tota aquesta bibliografia i l'obra de l'Andrew segur que ens ajudarà molt.
Jo, quan hem estat parlant de l'eficàcia de les reunions, que era una bona reunió, s'ha parlat de molts ingredients, no? Però m'he apuntat aquí amb asterisc de poder compartir amb el claustre el tema dels protocols de conversa, perquè em sembla que és molt important que tothom tingui veu a les reunions, que tothom se senti escoltat d'una manera eficaç. I ho tinc apuntat amb asterisc, o sigui que per mi em quedaria amb això. Gràcies.
Jo em quedo sobretot amb la reflexió sobre el feedback, perquè una de les coses que trobem sovint com a líders escolars més complicades és com donar amb el feedback, com explicar-li a algú que no està fent les coses com les hauria de fer, sense ser massa brusc i tallar-li les ales, però també deixant molt clar què està fent, què no és el que esperàvem i com creiem que pot millorar. A vegades és una conversa molt complexa i és una reflexió amb la que em quedo.
Well, I would like to close, if I could, by thanking all the members of the panel for these great comments, anecdotes, insights, takeaways. I'd like to thank Mireille and Begonia in particular for inviting me to work with you in the midst of this difficult time, but across all these miles to engage together around student engagement, teacher engagement, and collaborative professionalism. They all link to each other. And I'd like to thank you, all of you, many of you who have spent time in the evening, actually, for you, somewhere between the end of school and those wonderfully late dinners you have in Catalonia at extraordinary times of the evening. So I know it's probably even a bit early to be going off for dinner now. You've been started at 9 or 9:30 or 10 perhaps. But you're still giving up your time at this critical part of the day to engage in your own learning and to figure out how to be even better for each other and for your students. So thank you for coming. Thank you for organizing this. And Begonia and Mireille, would you like to close this session?
Sí, i tant. Moltes gràcies, professor Hargreaves. Com ja prevèiem, ha estat un webinar molt inspirador. Al principi del webinar no he tingut oportunitat de dir-ho. També volia dir que avui també hem tingut centenars de participants que s'havien registrat per seguir el webinar en directe i molts altres, perquè després sempre donem l'enllaç públic. Per tant, devem ser moltíssims més dels que s'han registrat. Avui, amb el seu ajut, amb l'ajut del professor Hargreaves, hem explorat el concepte de professionalisme col·laboratiu, hem compartit el seu significat i en fer-ho l'hem fet visible i li hem donat un nou valor. Afortunadament, el professionalisme col·laboratiu ja està incorporat en la cultura professional de molts equips educatius. I jo, per tancar la sessió d'avui, també vull compartir, com ha fet abans la Begoña, una cita del llibre Capital Professional. També la llegiré en castellà, per no llegir-la en anglès, que és la versió que de moment tenim disponible. I la cita que a mi m'agrada compartir ara al final és la següent. La práctica reflexiva colectiva es esencial para el capital decisorio y en este sentido para todo el capital profesional. En resumen, cuando añadimos la capacidad reflexiva y la investigación-acción a los valores del capital social y humano, perfeccionamos nuestra capacidad decisoria para tomar decisiones fundadas. Y ahora la part en negreta. Al igual que la medicina, la docencia es una ciencia imperfecta y necesitamos profesionales inteligentes que trabajen juntos para maximitzar su efectivitat. Jo he triat aquesta cita justament perquè enguany, com el professor ja coneix, el propòsit d'Aprendre a l'Escola que Aprèn és acompanyar els centres educatius en la construcció d'una xarxa d'aprenentatge a partir de la indagació col·laborativa. Nosaltres, com ja sabeu, emprem l'espiral d'indagació de Judy Halbert i Linda Kaiser com a metodologia que ens ajuda en la creació de contextos d'aprenentatge altament inclusius. No ho tenia preparat, ara hi ha una part que no tenia preparat, però que també no vull deixar-me de dir, i era que quan el professor parlava de... No sé si ho diré exactament com ho haurà dit el traductor, perquè jo l'escoltava en anglès, quan deia que també hem d'ajudar, sobretot els equips directius novells, hem d'ajudar-los a fer com un coaching de com liderar una bona reunió. Nosaltres no tenim aquest poder, però sí que intentem que el nostre equip d'indagació sigui un equip que treballi per principi de simetria que nosaltres que hem llegit que va dir el professor Jalmeta, és a dir, posar sempre experiències que després siguin bones al ser replicades davant dels aprenents. Tenir molt present aquestes oportunitats d'intentar donar veu a tothom. Això m'ha vingut quan he escoltat aquesta part de la intervenció. En fi, moltes gràcies novament als panelistes. Sé que sou només 4 dels centenars de persones que s'han inscrit en el webinar, però hem intentat recollir les aportacions de tothom també a través del xat. Un agraïment, doncs, per totes les persones que ens heu seguit a través del YouTube. També agraïm el suport tècnic, els professionals intèrprets, les nostres companyes que no apareixen aquí en pantalla però que em fan resums del xat, que fan totes aquestes coses. I ara ja sí, Begoña, et passo la paraula.
Gràcies, Mireia. Avui aquest principi de simetria ha lligat amb una frase que ha dit avui el professor Hargreaves. Una bona reunió és com una bona classe. Hem de poder aprendre alguna cosa. Un altre cop, el principi de simetria. Tots volem aprendre. Avui marxem amb moltes ganes de retrobar-nos i aprendre més sobre professionalisme col·laboratiu. Ha estat una tarda plena de propòsit perquè estem compromesos amb l'èxit de tots els alumnes. L'èxit educatiu com un dret de tots els alumnes. I avui hem après que hi ha 2 condicions essencials per a aquest èxit. Les altes expectatives són molt importants, però no són suficients. Cal integrar la cultura dels alumnes en el context d'aprenentatge. La cultura de tots ha de formar part de l'escola. Ha estat inspirador, emocionant, també ha estat un plaer i una gran oportunitat. I ara li faré una pregunta al professor. Moltes gràcies, professor Hargreaves. Nosaltres també esperem poder repetir aquesta experiència en persona. I esperem que aviat sigui possible convidar-lo a Barcelona. Vindria? Això esperem.
Would I come to Barcelona? It's like that's an even better question than would I like $1 million? So I think you know the answer.
Doncs l'esperem, segur que l'esperem.
Doncs aquí estarem. Muntarem una sessió professional i col·laborativa. Moltes gràcies a tots i molt bona nit.
That will be lovely. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.